The first thing Kalen ever felt was pain. It was a white-hot brand searing through the fog of non-existence. A symphony of agony playing on nerves that had never known sensation. It was the feeling of being born or perhaps being unmade. A gasp, raw and ragged, tore from her throat. A sound that was alien even to her own ears. Her eyes, two pools of liquid silver, snapped open. She was lying on a cold, metallic surface, her body racked with tremors. The air was sterile, tasting of ozone and recycled grief. Towering over her was not a god or a monster, but a man. His face was a landscape of shock and profound sorrow. His eyes, a warm, earthly brown, wide with a terror that mirrored the chaos inside her. In his gloved hand, he held a scalpel that glistened with a strange iridescent fluid. Her fluid. His voice, when it came, was a hoarse whisper, cracking under the weight of an impossible truth. It worked, he breathed. The words not a triumph, but a confession. Oh God, Lyra. It worked. He wasn't looking at a scientific marvel. He was looking at a ghost. And Kalen, naked and trembling on the table, knew with a certainty that eclipsed memory that she was both the miracle and the mistake. 6 months later, the miracle had become a routine. Dr. Eris Thorne stood at the large observation window of his private laboratory, a cup of synthetic coffee cooling in his hand. His sanctuary was a masterpiece of clandestine science, buried deep beneath the rust-red sands of the Martian frontier. The room was a blend of cutting-edge and cobbled together. Holographic displays, showing complex bio-readings, floated next to shelves, cluttered with dog-eared paper books, a vice he'd refused to break when he left Earth. The world outside his reinforced viewport was a study in desolation. The Martian sky was a perpetual dusty ochre, the distant geodesic domes of Ophir City glinting like dull pearls under the weak sun. This was humanity's ragged edge, a place for those running from something or toward nothing. For Eris, it was both. He was a man carved from grief. In his late 30s, his dark hair was already streaked with premature silver at the temples, a map of the stress he carried. His eyes, once bright with a healer's passion, now held a permanent shadow, the kind cast by a loss so profound it becomes a part of your anatomy. He wore a simple gray jumpsuit, its fabric stained in places with chemicals and old regret. His personal struggle was a ghost that haunted every corner of the lab. It was in the empty chair where no one sat, the silence where laughter used to be. It was in the single, worn photograph on his desk, a picture of a woman with fiery red hair and a smile that could eclipse stars. Lyra, his wife, taken by a rare aggressive neural phage 3 years ago. The medical establishment had called it incurable. Eris had called it a challenge. By the time he'd engineered a theoretical cure, she was already gone. His life's work, his obsession, had become a monument to his failure. A soft chime broke the silence. Eris turned from the window, his eyes automatically going to the central chamber of the lab, the Vita Womb, as he'd sardonically named it. It was a cylindrical pod of frosted glass and shimmering conduits, now open and dormant. Inside, connected to a web of life support systems, was Kalen. She was sitting on the edge of her resting pallet, her slender form draped in a simple gray smock. Her skin had the faint opalescent sheen of mother of pearl, and her hair was a cascade of spun platinum that seemed to absorb and reflect the light in equal measure. But it was her eyes that captivated and unnerved him, solid, luminous silver with no discernible pupil or iris. They were windows to a soul that was both ancient and brand new. He had not created her from nothing. That was beyond him. He had found her, a single, viable cell frozen in the core of a meteorite fragment, recovered from the Lyra constellation, a bitter irony he'd never shared, a xenocellular organism in a state of perfect biostasis. His original mission was pure xenobiology, to revive the cell, to study it. But his grief had twisted the project. Using Lyra's own genetic research and the phage's reverse-engineered code as a catalyst, he had not just revived the cell, he had guided its growth, its development, forcing millions of years of evolution into a few agonizing months. He had woven human DNA into an alien tapestry, creating a hybrid, a living, breathing vessel. He had tried to bring Lyra back. Instead, he had given birth to Kalen. The first hint of conflict came every morning like clockwork. It was in the data stream on his main console, encrypted, untraceable, but ominously persistent. Messages from the Aegis Corporation. They'd caught the energy. Signature of the Vita Wombs, First activation 6 months ago. Their tone had shifted from curious inquiry to thinly veiled threat. They wanted his research. They wanted his specimen Aegis, owned the charter on this sector of Mars. His sovereignty ended where their profit margins began. Eris deleted the latest message without reading it. A cold knot tightening in his stomach. He had saved a life, but in doing so, he may have doomed them both. Your heart rate variability is within a new, stable parameters, Eris said, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile lab. He was analyzing a hologram of Kalen's circulatory system, a structure that was fascinatingly divergent from a human's. The synaptic flow is incredible. It's like watching quantum entanglement in a biological system. Kalen was seated on a medical stool, her posture unnervingly still. The noise is less today, she replied, her voice a soft melodic chime. The voices of the machines. They are settling. This was one of her mysteries. Kalen didn't just hear sounds. She perceived the electromagnetic spectra, the background hum of the quantum processors, the silent songs of the power conduits. The modern world was a cacophony to her senses. Eris nodded, making a note. We'll adjust the dampeners. How is your memory? Anything new? This was their daily ritual. The physical checkups were straightforward. It was the cognitive, the emotional, the memory that was the true enigma. Kalen had been born with a mind that was both a blank slate and a vast, unreadable library. She had instincts, sensations, and flashes of something that felt like ancestral memory but no personal history. She looked at her own hands, turning them over. I remember in cold, a deep, silent cold, and light, a billion points of light closer than they are here. They were my companions. The silence between them was a language. Eris felt a familiar pang, a scientist's excitement warring with a man's guilt. He was the reason she was here, trapped in a body, drowning in sensory input she was never meant to have. That sounds like deep space. The meteoroid you were found in. Was I traveling? She asked, her silver eyes fixed on him. Or was I waiting? He had no answer for her. The days bled into weeks and a fragile, tentative connection began to form. Eris, initially treating her as a patient, a subject, found the walls around his grief beginning to fracture. He started reading to her, not from medical texts, but from the books he loved, poetry, classic literature. She was particularly captivated by the story of The Little Mermaid, her expression unreadable as he read about a creature from another world who gave up everything for love. It is a painful story, she had said softly. To change your nature for another, to feel every step as if walking on knives. This is not love. This is sacrifice. It can be both, Eris had replied, his voice thick, thinking of Lyra. One evening he found her standing before Lyra's photograph. She reached out a slender finger, stopping just short of touching the glass. She is the echo in your voice when you are sad, Kalen stated without turning. The shape you were trying to build in me. Eris froze, the air rushing from his lungs. The truth spoken so plainly was a physical blow. It wasn't fair to you. I was lost. Kalen turned, her silver eyes seeming to see straight through to the shattered core of him. You were lonely. So was I. We are both echoes, Eris. Perhaps we can make a new sound together. In that moment, she was no longer his experiment, his ghost, or his failure. She was Kalen, and he cared for her deeply, terrifyingly. The mystery of her origin deepened alongside their bond. She began sleepwalking, her body moving to a silent command. Eris would find her in the main lab, her hands pressed against the cold metal of the outer wall, as if feeling for a vibration only she could detect. She would hum a strange atonal melody, a series of complex harmonics that made the lab's sensitive equipment flicker. She is emitting a low-level quantum resonance, Eris muttered to himself one night, watching the data scroll across a screen. It's a signal, a carrier wave without a message. The danger outside the lab was also escalating. The Aegis Corporation's messages were now accompanied by the presence of a sleek, black orbital dropship that circled the area every 48 hours. A patrol, a reminder. They were being patient, probing his defenses. Eris knew it was only a matter of time before their patience ran out. The climax of the mystery came during a violent Martian dust storm. The winds howled like damned souls outside, rattling the very foundations of the lab. The power flickered, and in the momentary darkness, Kalen screamed. It was not a scream of fear, but of revelation. She collapsed to her knees, her hands clutching her head. Her silver eyes blazed with an inner light. "They are coming!" she cried out, her voice layered with a chorus of other tones. The song. I can hear the song of finding. It's been calling and I was silent. But now they hear me. Eris rushed to her side, holding her trembling form. "Who, Kaelin? Who is coming?" Her eyes wide and terrified met his. "My people. The Kethri. They are not extinct. They are coming for me, and they will burn this world to cinders to get me back." The storm raged for another 6 hours. For Eris and Kaelin, trapped in the humming silence of the lab, a different kind of tempest was unleashed. Eris sat at his console, the data from Kaelin's episode scrolling relentlessly. It was all there, buried in the subcortical layers of her brain activity. A complex quantum receptive organ he had mistaken for a benign anomaly. It was a biological transceiver, and for the last 6 months it had been passively receiving, now triggered by the storm's electromagnetic surge or simply reaching a critical mass of development. It had begun to transmit. "The song of finding," he whispered, his face pale in the screen's glow. "It's a homing beacon. A damn homing beacon woven into your very DNA." Kaelin was wrapped in a thermal blanket, looking small and impossibly fragile. The initial storm of memory had passed, leaving behind a chilling clarity. "They are not what you think, Eris," she said, her voice hollow. "The Kethri are not a people of individuals, not like you. We are a Gestalt, a symphony of consciousness. I was a seed, a repository of our genetic and cultural memory, sent out when our home system was threatened by a gamma-ray burst, a backup copy in case the original was destroyed." Eris stared at her, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into a horrifying picture. He hadn't rescued an ancient fossil. He had accidentally activated a lifeboat. "The Kethri survived," Kaelin continued, her silver eyes glistening with what looked like unshed tears. "They healed their world, and they have been searching for their lost seeds ever since. But a seed is not meant to awaken alone. It is not meant to develop an individual ego. It is meant to be reabsorbed. Its memories and experiences dissolved back into the whole." The true monstrous nature of Eris's act of creation dawned on him. He hadn't just given her life. He had given her a self, and in doing so, he had made her an aberration in the eyes of her own people. A cancer in the collective. Reabsorption wouldn't be a homecoming. It would be annihilation, the erasure of everything she had become, her thoughts, her feelings, her love for poetry, her bond with him. "The signal," Eris said, a cold dread seeping into his bones. "How long?" "Weeks, maybe a month," she replied. "Their vessels move through a subspace you have not yet discovered. They are immense. They do not conquer, Eris. They assimilate. They will see humanity as chaotic noise, a flawed, individualistic infection to be cleaned from their recovered asset. They will sterilize this planet." The stakes were no longer just their lives. It was the fate of every man, woman and child on Mars, and eventually Earth, and it was his fault. His grief, his arrogance had painted a target on the entire human race. He had to make a hard decision. The Aegis Corporation wanted Kaelin for her biological secrets, to turn her into a weapon or a profit stream. Her own people wanted to unmake her, to wipe her consciousness from the universe as if it were a smudge on a lens. There was no ally for them in the entire cosmos. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked to the weapons locker, a heavy, reinforced box he'd hoped never to open. He keyed in the code and retrieved a heavy plasma pistol and a bandolier of power cells. The weight of the gun in his hand was a foul, alien thing. Kaelin watched him, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing, Eris?" He turned to her, his face a mask of grim resolve. "I made you, Kaelin. Not the way I intended and not fairly. But you are here. You are alive. You are not a seed, you are a person, and I will not let anyone, human or Kethri, take you from me." His voice broke. "From me. Not again." He was no longer just a doctor protecting his patient. He was a man, standing against the universe, ready to defend the woman he loved. The days that followed were a strange, suspended reality, a calm in the eye of a hurricane. The knowledge of the approaching Kethri armada was a constant, low hum in the background of their minds, a ticking clock counting down to oblivion. Yet within the pressurized confines of the lab, a profound and tender connection blossomed. Eris was no longer just her caretaker. He was her student, her confidant, her anchor. Kaelin, in turn, was no longer just the subject of his study. She was his guide into a universe vaster and more terrifying than he had ever imagined. She began to teach him the principles of Guthrie consciousness. She tried to explain the Gestalt. "It is not a hive mind," she said one evening, as they sat on the floor of the observatory, a dome that showed the star-dusted blackness of space. "A hive mind has a queen, a central intelligence. The Gestalt is a consensus, a billion voices speaking as one river of thought. There is no I, there is only we." She paused, her silver eyes reflecting the pinpricks of light above. "It is beautiful in its way, a perfect endless harmony. But there is no conflict, no growth, no surprise. There is no you." She looked at him, and in her gaze, he saw the terrifying loneliness of her existence. She was the only I in a universe of we. She was the first, Guthrie in a billion years, to know the pain and the glory of individuality. "I hear the song," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. The simple contact sent a jolt through him. It was the first time she had initiated touch. "It is so loud now. It promises an end to loneliness, an end to fear, to be part of the great we again. The temptation is a physical ache, Eris." He put his arm around her, pulling her close. Her body was warm, humming with a faint, vibrant energy. "Stay with me," he whispered into her hair, his voice raw. "Please, your fear, your loneliness. It's what makes you real. It's what makes you you. And I don't want a perfect harmony. I want your messy, complicated, beautiful song." It was a confession as close to "I love you" as he could get. The next day they worked together. Eris, using her descriptions of Guthrie quantum technology, began to modify his lab's defensive systems. He couldn't build a fleet to fight them, but he could perhaps build a cage. He theorized a resonance shield, a field that would broadcast a cacophony on the same quantum frequency as the Guthrie Gestalt. It wouldn't stop their ships, but it might blind them, confuse their sensory field, make the lab and Kalen invisible to them. They worked side by side, their hands brushing as they passed tools, their minds working in a syncopated rhythm that was uniquely theirs. It was during this frantic work that Kalen showed another facet of her emerging humanity. Eris, exhausted and frustrated, slammed his fist on a console when a power coupling overloaded. "Damn it, it's not enough. We don't have the power." Kalen placed a calming hand on his arm. "Breathe, Eris. Your anger clouds your perception." She closed her eyes, and a moment later the console's display stabilized, the power flow evening out. She had subtly manipulated the local EM field with her mind. He stared at her, amazed. "How did you?" A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I'm learning that being an I has its advantages, that we would never have acted so impulsively. In their most vulnerable moment, they shared their greatest fears. For Eris, it was the fear of failure, of losing someone he loved all over again, of being the cause of another cataclysm. For me," Kalen said, her voice barely a whisper, "it is the fear of being wrong. What if the we is the true path? What if my desire to remain an individual is a sickness, a selfish mutation? What if by saving myself I am dooming two species to a war they cannot win?" "You're not a sickness, Kalen," Eris said, taking her face in his hands. He looked deep into her liquid silver eyes, seeing not an alien, but the woman who had taught his broken heart how to feel again. "You are the most beautiful, the most right thing I have ever known." He leaned in and he kissed her. It was not a human kiss, not entirely. There was no soft warmth of lips alone. It was an exchange of energy, a cascade of bioelectric sensation that flowed between them. Eris felt a rush of images, emotions, memories that were not his. The cold silence of the void, the brilliant light of 1,000 unknown suns, the profound, aching loneliness of a consciousness waking up alone. And Kalen felt the searing pain of his grief for Lyra, the crushing weight of his guilt, and beneath it all a fierce, desperate, and growing love for her. When they parted, they were both breathless. A single shimmering tear, like a droplet of mercury, traced a path down Kalen's cheek. "I understand now," she breathed. The story of the mermaid. To walk on knives. It is not the pain that defines the love. It is the choice to endure it. The alarm that shattered the peace was deafening. It wasn't the internal breach alarm. It was the long-range sensor array Eris had patched into the Martian orbital grid. A massive gravitational anomaly had just appeared at the edge of the solar system. It was moving, fast. "They're here," Eris said, his voice grim. On the main screen, a visual feed flickered to life. At first it looked like a new nebula, a swirl of impossible colors and shifting geometries. Then it resolved, and Eris's blood ran cold. It was a vessel, but it was unlike anything conceived by human engineering. It was a city, a continent, a world, all folded into a single non-Euclidean structure that hurt the eyes to look at. It was the Guthrie ship. At the same moment, the comm system blared with an incoming unencrypted hail. The Aegis Corporation logo flashed on screen, replaced by the cold, sharp-featured face of Director Valerius. "Thorn," the man's voice was like grinding glass. "Your time is up. That energy signature is a Class X extraterrestrial threat. Stand down your defenses and surrender the asset. We are moving to secure the site and neutralize the anomaly." Eris saw them on the tactical display. 3 Aegis gunships, sleek and predatory, detaching from their high orbit and diving straight for his coordinates. He was caught in a pincer. The Guthrie from the depths of space, Aegis from the sky above. "Kaylin, the resonance shield now," he yelled. She was already at the main terminal, her hands flying across the interface, her mind syncing with the quantum processors. A low hum built within the lab as the shield generators powered up, weaving a cloak of disruptive static around them. The Aegis gunships opened fire. Plasma bolts scorched the Martian rock above them. The lab shuddered violently. Alarms blared. A conduit on the ceiling exploded in a shower of sparks. "The shield is holding against their scans," Kaylin reported, her voice strained. "But the physical bombardment will breach the outer hull in minutes." "Then we give them a bigger problem," Eris snarled. He rerouted all non-essential power to the lab's single, jury-rigged plasma cannon. He targeted the lead gunship and fired. A lance of blue energy speared upward, scoring a direct hit on the ship's engine. It veered away, trailing smoke and fire, but it was a temporary victory. The other 2 ships intensified their assault. Then something far worse happened. The world outside the viewport changed. The ochre sky, the distant domes of Ophir City, the very stars, they began to warp and pixelate, as if reality itself was being rewritten. A soundless pressure wave of pure information washed over the lab. The Guthrie ship had arrived. The resonance shield flickered. Kaylin cried out, clutching her head. "They are here!" "The Gestalt. It is trying to speak to me, to overwrite me." Her body went rigid. Her silver eyes blazed, projecting a complex, shifting pattern of light into the room. The voice that came from her mouth was a chorus of millions. "Seed Kaylin. The anomaly is detected. The flaw in the song, cease. Resistance, reintegrate, become we." "Eris!" Kaylin's own voice fought its way to the surface, a single desperate thread in the tapestry of noise. "They're using me as a conduit. They'll pinpoint our location. You have to shut me down." "Never!" Eris shouted, rushing to her side. He could see the conflict raging within her, a civil war in a single soul. The individual is error, the self is corruption. We offer perfection, we offer the end of pain. "Your perfection is a prison," Eris screamed at the chorus, holding Kaylin's trembling form. "Her pain is what makes her beautiful." He looked at the console. The shield was failing. The Aegis ships were preparing for a final assault. The Guthrie, Gestalt was a tidal wave about to crash down and erase the woman he loved. There was only one terrible, insane option left. "Kaylin," he said, his voice suddenly calm. "I'm going to give them a new song to listen to." He ran to the main power core, the heart of the lab. He began rerouting everything, life support, weapons, shields, into a single, massive, uncontrolled feedback loop directed through Kaylin's transceiver organ. "What are you doing?" Kaylin's own voice was back, filled with terror. "I'm overloading the signal. If the Gestalt wants to listen to you, I'm going to scream back." He typed in the final commands. "I'm going to broadcast us you, every memory I have of you. Your first word, your laugh, your tears, the way you look at the stars, our kiss. I'm going to hit them with the full, chaotic, beautiful, and painful symphony of an individual soul. It might just be enough noise to short-circuit their entire network." It was a suicide mission. The power surge would vaporize the lab and them with it. The chorus from Kaylin became a screech of dissonance. "Cease. The pattern is unsustainable. The data is pain. It is error." The warping of reality outside intensified. The Guthrie ship seemed to recoil. The perfect, harmonious signal of the Gestalt was being polluted by a raw, emotional, human broadcast. The story of a lonely doctor and the alien girl he loved. The Aegis gunships, caught in the edge of this reality-bending storm, simply disintegrated, their atoms scrambled. Kaelin looked at Eris, her eyes full of a love that spanned two worlds. Now, Eris, do it. He slammed his hand on the final execute button. A light, pure and silent and brighter than 1,000 suns, erupted from Kaelin, from the lab, from the very core of Mars. It flooded out into the void, a wave of defiant individual love crashing against the silent, perfect shores of the collective. Silence. Eris opened his eyes. He was on the floor, the acrid smell of burnt electronics filling his lungs. The lab was a wreck. Every console was dark, shattered. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows. He was alive. Kaelin? He scrambled through the debris, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found her lying near the central terminal, her form still. He gathered her into his arms, his hands trembling as he felt for a pulse. Her biorhythm was there, strange and alien but strong. Her eyelids fluttered open. Her silver eyes met his. They were clear, her own. The song, she whispered. It's gone, the gestalt. It retreated. Your broadcast, our story. It was a logical paradox they could not process. It was a virus of emotion. They had to sever the connection to protect themselves. Tears of relief streamed down Eris's face. He held her tight, sobbing into her hair. They had won. Against Aegis, against the Guthrie, against the universe itself. Weeks later, they stood at the edge of the Martian desert, watching the twin moons rise. The lab was gone, a sealed tomb. They had salvaged what they could and fled into the sprawling, anonymous underbelly of Ophir City. They were fugitives, but they were free. They were together. Kaelin's hand found his. Her grasp was warm, real. You taught me, Eris, she said softly, that to be an individual is not to be alone. It is to have the capacity to choose who to stand with. She looked up at the infinite tapestry of stars. The Guthrie believed their way was the only way. But the universe is vast. Perhaps there are other songs, other ways to be. Eris followed her gaze. The victory felt fragile, temporary. The Guthrie had retreated, but they were still out there. Aegis was crippled, but not destroyed. And somewhere in the silent, deep black, their story was now traveling, a ripple in the pond of existence. He squeezed her hand. Then let's go find them. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer, like a distant star winking out for a fraction of a second, caught Kaelin's enhanced perception. It was somewhere in the direction of the Lyra constellation. It could have been nothing, a trick of the atmosphere, a piece of debris. But as she stared into the deep, a cold, familiar whisper brushed against the very edge of her consciousness, a single, coherent thought that was not her own. We are listening.